Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 1. Hear the word of the Lord. I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys. As a lily among brambles, so is my love among the young women. As an apple tree among the trees of the forest, so is my beloved among the young men. With great delight I sat in his shadow, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. He brought me to the banqueting house, and his banner over me was love. Sustain me with raisins, refresh me with apples, for I am sick with love. His left hand is under my head, and his right hand embraces me. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or the does of the field, that you not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. May the Lord add his blessings to the reading of his holy word. As I said before, one of the things I found strangest in Asian culture when I lived in Singapore was the attitude toward sex, really toward the body, and and all things like that. On the one hand, in Singapore at least, they would seem very strict, strict divorce laws, and they were strict against pornography and the like. And so you'd think that they were repressed. That would be the conclusion. They were just repressive kind of, people. But the truth is they're really more earthy, more realistic, and it's Western culture, our culture, that has traditionally been more repressed. Historically, the view from Platonic culture is that matter, the body, and so sex is bad, at least unspiritual. And so something, if you're spiritual, you want to get away from the body and all that. So as they say in church, the approach to sex has been first to hush, and then to blush, and then to bash. And you see the influence of that are really what are unbiblical ideas on Western culture when you go outside of it, especially like I did. You live in Asian culture, live in Asian society for a while, and you'll see there that people just don't assume that these topics are to be hushed up. While living in Singapore, I was tutoring some Korean seminary students in English who were planning on coming to the USA to finish their studies. Now, once the two young men students asked me a question, what's the word for a woman with large breasts? Now, besides some slang, there is a proper word, buxom, but I knew enough about their culture by now that if I just taught them that word, buxom, write it down, learn to pronounce it right, and they could very well come to America and meet some woman and soon tell her, "My, you're very buxom." And I did not want to be responsible for the slap that would ensue. So I said, "Just don't mention it." And they looked at each other, very puzzled, shrugged their shoulder. "Why? It's natural." And I said, "Yes, I know. Just don't mention it." And they still couldn't understand that. And that's been the attitude of much of polite society in the West, including the church, about all things having to do with the body, with sex, and so much so that I think it's really twisted the way that the Song of Solomon is interpreted. For example, Mary took a class in a Bible college in Singapore that dealt with the Song of Solomon, and I asked her whether they took what they call an allegorical approach. That is, they interpret all this talk you find in Song of Solomon about the body and kissing and embracing and all that as symbolic of other truths, spiritual truths, because it can't possibly, the assumption is it can't possibly be talking about literal, physical love and things like that. Because after all, we all know that's carnal. So it can't really be talking about that. And she said, no. Was that the approach they took on Singapore? No. She said people there wouldn't see any need for an allegorical interpretation. But in Western society, for centuries, the Song of Solomon has been interpreted allegorically. That is, it couldn't possibly mean, people assumed, what it literally would appear to mean. So, for example, the rose of Sharon, a lily among the valleys, like we saw in chapter 2, verse 1, was Christ himself, whom we are to desire. And it all sounds so devout and so pious. Now, who wants to argue with that? No one wants to say, no, you shouldn't love Jesus. No, obviously, we don't say that. The problem, though, with that interpretation is that's not the meaning the original author intended. Whoever wrote it, originally when they wrote it, what did they mean to communicate? And that's really a major interpretive key, when dealing with any passage of the Bible. What did the original author mean? Second, reading it like that, symbolically, allegorically, is totally arbitrary. The Christians say it's Jesus' love for the church. Jews say it's Yahweh's love for Israel. Others say it's God's love for them individually. And each little thing mentioned, the body parts and so forth, they say are symbolic for this or for that, but who's to say? It's based on nothing other than the feelings of some sentimental interpreter. And so that approach to interpreting it has become less and less popular over about the last century, until today some have swung really what I think is to the opposite extreme, so far as to interpret the Song of Solomon as basically now being a sex manual. So, for example, if you look just one verse up above what we read, our couch is green, the beams of our house are cedar, our rafters are pine. I read one commentator that seriously interpreted that to be, this is instructions on how you should decorate your bedroom. Okay? Want a good love life, decorate like this, with a green couch, I guess, and cedar and pine, whatever. By the way, they're in a forest. Do you get it? Really? Their couch is green because they're sitting on grass. Their house, quote house, cedar and pine because they're looking up at cedar and pine trees. Okay? Now, the problem with that kind of sex manual approach is threefold. There's three problems with that. First, who writes an instruction manual in poetry? I mean, come on. I mean, wouldn't you be irritated if you got an instruction manual about something like how to assemble a bicycle? You opened up the instructions, and it's written in poetry with rhymes and symbolic language, symbols you couldn't figure out what they stood for. That would I want clear, direct instructions. Second, it has the same problem as the allegorical interpretation. It's totally arbitrary. Some creative person thinks this phrase, like his right hand embraces me in verse 6, refers to a specific sex act, which they will then say the Bible says do. Really, I don't see that there. It's interesting that when someone says they see it there, it's interesting about what it says about them, but I don't see the Bible saying that. And third, the fact is the Song of Solomon is not all about sex. It's really much bigger than that. It's about the relationship in which sex is found. It's about what C.S. Lewis called in his wonderful book, The Four Loves, Eros. What some people today only think of, when the world says love, this is basically what they mean. Love. But there are other kinds, and what we might call romantic love. The Song of Solomon is about that. Eros. Romance. What I'll call love for most of the rest of this sermon. Now, we'll only get a sampling of the Song of Solomon today. After all, it's not a manual. It needs to be read step by step. It's not for instruction, I don't think, but for celebration. The way I recommend that you married people read it is read it together in parts. The wife taking the woman's part, marked by she in the ESV, and the man taking the man's part, marked by he. By the way, the woman has twice as many words in Song of Solomon as the man does. So you make a joke out of that. There's a good one there, I'm sure. And there's also a chorus, and you got to work out who takes care of that. Now, for now, we can see several facets of love, what the world calls love. I've listed at least 14 of them. You can probably find more, but 14 will do for today. And it won't take too long. It won't be too painful. First, love is affirming. That is, it makes you feel affirmed and wanted, appreciated, loved. Notice in chapter 2, verse 1, she says about herself, I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys. In other words, that's how this relationship makes her feel about herself. And we see why in verse 2, next verse. As a lily among the brambles, this is the man speaking to her now. As a lily among the brambles, so is my love among the young women. No wonder she feels like a flower. Because he's telling her she is. She feels affirmed because he is affirming her. She feels valued because he is valuing her. Now, if instead of that, a woman, it's usually a woman, just like this one, is made to feel, I'm fat, I'm stupid, I can't do anything right, I'm just lucky he will put up with me, that's a sign of a bad relationship. That's not love, because love is affirming. Second, love is adoring. Notice he is adoring her. You're like a flower, a lily, compared to the other rest of the women who are, at least to me, like thorns. You're the rose in this rose bush. And she responds in verse 3, as an apple among the trees of the forest, so is my beloved among the young men. In a very similar way, different imagery, but sort of the same meaning. Most of the trees in the forest, aren't much good, right? You go in the forest, can't get much out of most trees. They shed leaves or pine needles, what do you do with it? But if you came across, you were in a forest, there's an apple tree there. Ah, that's good. That's fruit. You can eat it. Something you need. And that's what she's saying about him. You have what I want. You have something I need. Much of the rest of this book is an exchange of adoring words between each other. Because that's what love does. It adores. Now, of course, some might say, well, that's fine for them, but it's not my nature. I'm not so expressive. And maybe they're the kind of person that if their kid brings home a report card, has 5 A's and 1 A minus, they'll immediately say, what's wrong with the A minus? You been goofing off too much? What's going on? Say, I'm not so adoring. You have to understand me. Well, that's what love does here. So I guess in this one area, if that's you, we'll have to give you an A minus. Oh, that's cruel, isn't it? That's just cruel. That was a low blow. Third, love is refreshing. It delights in the person loved. In the second half of verse 3, with great delight I sat in his shadow, and his fruit to me was sweet to my taste. This is continuing the thought that he's like an apple tree. Fruit is what comes from his life, the effect of the love on the one being loved. Love is refreshing. It's like eating fruit. It is in verse 4 like drinking wine. He brought me to the banqueting house. It's literally a house of wine. It also probably had something to do with a wedding reception, the banqueting house, a house of wine. And the analogy is changed in the very next verse. But the meaning, or at least the feeling, is the same. And it's supposed to be a book about feelings. The feeling is the same. His banner over me was love. The banner is like a flag that a king would have, but it expressed his authority, his protective care. Here's the man. He's like a king. He's expressing his protective care over me. She feels the security of his love. There's no sense of danger or fear. He's suddenly going to turn abusive any moment now. I burn the dinner. He's going to get nasty. Instead, she's refreshed and wants to stay there with him. Fourth, love is physical. In verse 6, his left hand is under my head and his right hand embraces me. That's not symbolic for anything. That means his left hand is under her head and his right hand embraces her. That's what it means. Love wants to touch. It revels in an embrace. That's why younger, unmarried couples need to be warned against touching too much, because it's natural that they want to touch, but you got to watch yourself. Sometimes it's advised to hurry up. You want to touch so much, hurry up and get married so you can touch all you want. Okay? Don't have a year and a half engagement. That's crazy. Get married now so you can touch. Sometimes older couples need to be reminded to touch. Don't keep your hands to yourself so much. Thank you, George. You got the point. Fifth, what seems a bolt out of the blue. All right? Come to verse 7. Seems almost like totally out of place, because we're humming along with all this adoration and this touchy-feely stuff. And then comes all this exaltation, really, of what is Eros. And then verse 7. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or the does of the field, that you not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. Right in the midst of the celebration of love is a warning to the single people who may be reading or hearing this and are beginning to, I want some of that. I want some of that action. They want someone to love and to love them back. Seems so inviting, so attractive. Won't someone please fulfill these desires for me? But then comes, slap, wake up, get out of it. Go take a cold shower. This is it. Verse 7 is a cold shower. Don't awaken those desires. I adjure you. In other words, I make you swear. It's important enough to make you take an oath. I can't just leave it up to just advising you, suggesting it to you, leaving a hint. Maybe it'd be better off if you cool it. No, I have to make you pledge that you will not arouse love, your needs to love and have someone love you until the time is right. When you're old enough, mature enough, you're in the right situation in life, and there is the right person there to love. Don't feed those feelings until everything is in place. Don't constantly feed your mind, with romance novels and love stories and love songs and daydreams. Oh, he's so dreamy, and plans of the great relationship. If you're single, don't be reading bridal magazines and planning your wedding, or whatever the internet equivalent would be of that today. That's stirring up and awakening love without anyone to love. It will probably make you desperate and then vulnerable to the first person who comes along who just looks like he or she can play that role. Christian single people should fill their time with serving the Lord, and if your mind is going off into lust or into longing for romance, fill it instead with God's Word. Use that as a trigger. As soon as those thoughts start to come, to memorize Scripture. You know, whatever, pick your Scripture. Stir up love for the Lord and downplay love of Eros, because love is reserved. Well, next we'll find 4 more facets of love in chapter 3, verses 1 to 5. So let me read that for you. Chapter 3, starting verse 1. On my bed by night I sought him whom my soul loves. I sought him, but found him not. I will rise now and go about the city, in the streets and in the squares. I will seek him whom my soul loves. I sought him, but found him not. The watchmen found me as they went about in the city. Have you seen him whom my soul loves? Scarcely had I passed them when I found him whom my soul loves. I held him and would not let him go until I had brought him into my mother's house and into the chamber of the one who conceived me. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or the does of the field, that you not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. 6. I'm going to run out of fingers pretty soon. But love is longing. Chapter 3, verse 1. She longs for him whom my soul loves. Notice that when she doesn't find him at home, she goes out looking for him. There's no, I can take it or leave it. Whatever. He's gone here. Oh, well, who cares? And it's not that an attitude with love. One of the things that bothered me when Mary and I first started dating was that I thought we didn't have enough time together. We only had like 6 weeks before the school year ended, and I went back to Alabama for the summer, and she was graduating and leaving for good. We're so different from different cultures and countries. And so I had her visit me in Alabama, but cerebrally, kind of coldly calculating, I came to the decision that we didn't have enough time together, and so should simply say goodbye after this. But it was a breakup that never really took, because I longed for her. My longing overcame my thinking. Thank God. 7th, love is specific. Notice how many times the phrase, whom my soul loves, is used in those 5 verses. 4 times, once in each of the first 4 verses. I almost sound a little repetitive, doesn't it? Whom my soul loves. She's not looking for just any man, She's not looking, man, I need a man. Where can I find one? Oh, these watchmen will do. No, she's looking for one specific one. The one her soul, her life loves. C.S. Lewis wrote, Eros makes a man really want not a woman, but one particular woman. 8th, love is a family affair. In chapter 3, verse 4, she wants to bring her man home to mother. She wants to show him off to mama. Notice that? Bring her to my mother's house. Contrary to so much romantic fiction, all the way back to Romeo and Juliet, it's 2 lovers will just ignore or even destroy their family's connections, just to be with that one they think they love. Ideally, love wants to include the family, if at all possible. As Mark Driscoll noted in a video we watched, only a bad guy wants to take a woman out of a good social network, isolate her from family, friends, and church. That's the sign of a bad guy. Real love will want to keep you as close as possible to good families. Or in churches, for that matter. 9th, love is dangerous. In verse 5 is the same warning in chapter 2, verse 7. Did you think I was repeating myself? If you're reading, no, it's there again. Word for word. That means that the warning is serious enough to need repeating. Okay, something's repeated, it's probably repeated because we need to hear it again. Love, or what looks and feels like it, is dangerous. That's why I commonly warn you about the intoxicating power of love, of making an idol of that one dream relationship, because it's dangerous. Now, so someone could conclude in hearing that, well then, Eros is a demon. Romantic love is bad. So if you can't control yourself sexually, well then make a cold, calculated decision to marry one person and do what you got to do, but don't get drawn into the trap of Eros. But that's not at all what I mean. That's not what I mean at all when I warn against the dangers of the relationship of Eros. I also warn against the dangers of the idolatry of money. But I don't suggest that you should, I'm opposed to all money and you should get rid of it all. Although if you're going to do that, give it to me. I'll take care of it. But, I'm not suggesting you just divest yourself of all money and go run off and live in a monastery somewhere. The monastery's got to have money to pay its bills too, by the way. I know I warn against the dangers of Eros for the same reason that we warn against the dangers of electricity. You know, we put up signs warning of hazards of electricity, especially if there's a bare wire or something like that. So much so that if someone didn't know any better and all they heard was our warnings against, you could get shocked, be careful, dangers of electricity, they might come to the conclusion we hate electricity. And that's why we're trying to discourage everyone from using it. No, of course not. We love electricity. It makes so many luxuries possible. It makes these lights, it's an amplification, so we have it close by. It's only bad if handled in the wrong way. It can shock you, it can even kill you. Just so we warn about Eros for the same reason. It makes many pleasures and joys possible, so we want it close. But it is dangerous. Very dangerous. If you don't have a safe way of handling it, and you turn your desire for love, and to turn it all the way to max power, you'll probably get shocked. Likely you will make yourself desperate, which will ironically make it harder for you to find someone to love. In my opinion, and I'm no expert in what women want, so I shouldn't write a book on it. Women usually find it totally off-putting to see a man who is just consumed by desperation. Just kind of this air about it. He's just so discontent with himself. He's looking for anyone who'll take him, please. Men often also dislike, maybe even find that scary, when it's a woman. Whoa, back up. Or some men will use that desperation, if a woman has it, to take advantage of the woman, suggesting to her, usually unspoken suggesting, but I'll give you the love you want if you give me the sex I want. Of course, it's a bad deal, because he'll want the sex now, and later when she wants the love, he'll be gone, probably taking advantage of the next desperate girl. Having a fully awakened longing for love in a single person is dangerous. That's why here, again, in chapter 3, verse 5, single people are warned, unless you are ready to handle it, including, especially, someone in your life that you as a Christian can love. A Christian like yourself who will help you love the Lord most of all. Unless you are ready for it, don't feed those desires for it. Love is dangerous. Well, two more facets of love, found in chapter 4, verse 8 to chapter 5, verse 1. Okay, chapter 4, verse 8, if you turn there. It starts kind of in the middle of this discourse. Chapter 4, verse 8, come with me from Lebanon, my bride. Come with me from Lebanon. Depart from the peak of Amana, from the peak of Sinar and Hermon, from the dens of lions, from the mountains of leopards. You have captivated my heart, my sister, my bride. You have captivated my heart with one glance of your eyes, with one jewel of your necklace. How beautiful is your love, my sister, my bride. How much better is your love than wine, and the fragrance of your oils than any spice. Your lips drip nectar, my bride. Honey and milk are under your tongue. The fragrance of your garments is like the fragrance of Lebanon. A garden locked is my sister, my bride, a spring locked, a fountain sealed. Your shoots are an orchard of pomegranates with all its choicest fruits, henna with nard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon, with all trees and frankincense, myrrh and aloes, with all choice spices, a garden fountain, a well of living water, and flowing streams from Lebanon. Awake, O north wind, and come, O south wind. Blow upon my garden, let its spices flow. Let my beloved come to his garden and eat his choicest fruits. I came to my garden, my sister, my bride. I gathered my myrrh with my spice. I ate my honeycomb and my honey. I drank my wine and my milk. Eat, friends, drink, and be drunk with love. Well, 10th, love is marital. Notice the term my bride occurs 6 times from chapter 4, verse 8 to chapter 5, verse 1. My bride. So they're married. They may be newlyweds, but they're married. And that makes the Song of Solomon different from so much Hollywood romance and the like, in which the action usually occurs outside of marriage. Here, this love has brought them into marriage, into a commitment that they dream will last until death do them part. C.S. Lewis wrote, "To be in love is to both intend and to promise lifelong fidelity." Now, someone who doesn't have that first intent that it lasts, and is then, second, unwilling to make a promise, a real promise, with witnesses, with a ring to prove it and a marriage certificate so that even the government is called in to testify to it. Someone who doesn't have that, who just says, sure, I love you, baby, but why fuss about rings and ceremonies and paperwork? Someone who thinks like that probably has no love. That's why I find it so tragic today. All this cohabitation, living together. Despite all the talk, all the passion, it's often so completely loveless. Because love is marital. 11th, love is sexual. I should say that right, sexual. Okay, my voice went high. Starting in verse 11, leading up to chapter 5, verse 1, things are starting to get pretty hot there. I might should have rated this sermon PG-13. I don't know. Maybe the kids should have been sent off to see a cartoon. But I don't think they knew what was going on. There's a building sensuality here. The lips and the honey and the milk. The bride is a garden locked in verse 12. That is, she is, or at least was, a virgin until now that she's married. That chastity is celebrated. She was a spring locked, a fountain sealed. In other words, no man got to enjoy the pleasures she offered until now that she's married. And now he is enjoying those pleasures in verses 11 to 16. So there's this pleasing aromas, this list of refreshing, sensual, lovely things. Refreshment, like from a spring of fresh water. And then at the end of chapter 4, in chapter 5, verse 1, hey. And here's the great irony about the debate on how to interpret the Song of Solomon. Some say it has to be allegorical, that it's symbolic language, that's symbolic language used to describe other truths. They say that because they assume no truly inspired spiritual book would be about sex. But it's not usually allegorical, because that's not how the original author intended it. But for example, you go back, when he writes in chapter 4, verse 1 and on, we didn't read that part, but these poetic comparisons, some of the things that Song of Solomon is best known for, seems strange to us, almost kind of funny sometimes. Your eyes are like doves behind your veil. Your hair is like a flock of goats. We don't usually think of that as a good thing, but your teeth are like shorn ewes. On and on like that. He means literally to praise her beauty, her looks. He's using analogies, but it's not allegorical. And the original author never would have understood our hang-up that it can't be inspired and physical, even sexual, at the same time. But in kind of a funny irony, just here, in chapter 4, verse 16, in chapter 5, verse 1, it's allegorical there. The language is symbolic, because that's not about gardening. There's no gardening going on there. If you think she's saying, let's go out and pull some weeds. No, that's not what's going on here. Love is sexual. People do sometimes need to be told this. I know of young women getting married at 18 who were totally shocked that their wedding night included sex. No one told them. Instead, there was this attitude like what I told those Korean seminary students. Just don't talk about it. Sometimes married couples suffer for years with some kind of sexual dysfunction because they won't talk about it. Sometimes serious marital problems, even affairs and divorce, happen because one partner decides the marriage isn't going to be sexual anymore and the other doesn't know how to talk about it. Now, our culture hasn't always been so hung up and afraid to talk about it. In my doctoral research, I found a Puritan church in which a wife took before the whole congregation the problem of a husband who was not having sex enough for her. And when you can figure that out, take a while to think about that. And when you figure that out, you've learned a lot about the biblical view of the body and sex and marriage and the church. Well, 3 more facets about love. In chapter 8, verses 1 to 10. Told you we're skipping around. Chapter 8, verses 1 to 10. This is the last section that we'll be looking at anyway. Chapter 8, verse 1. Oh, that you were like a brother to me, who nursed at my mother's breast. If I found you outside, I would kiss you, and none would despise me. I would lead you and bring you into the house of my mother, she who used to teach me. I would give you spiced wine to drink and juice of my pomegranate. His left hand is under my head, and his right hand embraces me. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, that you not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. Who is that coming up from the wilderness, leaning on her beloved? Under the apple tree I awakened you. There your mother was in labor with you. There she who bore you was in labor. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm, for love is strong as death. Jealousy is fierce as the grave. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can floods drown it. If a man offered for love all the wealth of his house, he would be utterly despised. We have a little sister, and she has no breast. What shall we do for our sister on the day when she is spoken for? If she is a wall, we will build on her a battlement of silver. If she is a door, we will enclose her with boards of cedar. I was a wall, and my breasts were like towers. Then I was in his eyes as one who finds peace. Well, 12th, love is expressive, but private. In verse 1, oh, that you were like a brother to me. That seems like a strange desire to have, isn't it? But she explains why. If I found you outside, I would kiss you, and none would despise me. Like a lot of conservative cultures, they disapproved of public displays of affection, PDA. And so since they're in public, she wishes he was at least seen as a brother so she could kiss him without being looked down on. She's expressive, but knows that's reserved for privacy. In private, again, he touches her face and embraces her. Notice that phrase is repeated. 13th, love is worth waiting for. Verse 4 sound familiar by now? See that? This is the third time this warning is repeated in the Song of Solomon. The temptation with all this exaltation of Eros is that we make finding it our number one priority. Always playing the boyfriend, girlfriend dating game, jumping at the first opportunity when we think we found it. And so people will, when they have that, when they fall into that, they'll give sex for it. They'll change their beliefs for it. They'll leave their family. They'll lose friends and think they've made a good exchange, all because they've been spending their youth stirring up and turning up their craving for love. And they thought it was innocent enough while they were doing it. There are even Christian romance novels, I can't imagine. Anyway, parents will be constantly talking, maybe in prayer, about who you're going to marry, talking about boyfriend this, girlfriend that. And, and they'll think, what's wrong with planning ahead? Even if you're planning a wedding and you're single. What's wrong? What's wrong? You're stirring up and awakening love before it pleases, before the time is right. You've set a little fire, like setting a campfire, and you hope nothing will go wrong, and maybe God will be merciful to you and send someone before the fire gets out of hand, becomes a wildfire, but maybe he won't, and you find yourself getting burned by a fire set too early. Instead of stirring up love, in verse 6, set a seal upon your heart. Guard your heart, Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23 says, with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life. Set your mind on things above. Colossians chapter 3, verse 2 says, don't waste your youth in search of Eros, the perfect relationship, in the hopes that once you get that out of the way, you can then turn to the Lord. No, it doesn't work like that. Set a seal upon your heart, so that this quest for love doesn't take over. Because if it does, verse 6 says, love is as strong as death. Jealousy is as fierce as the grave. Its flashes, I think it's like lightning he's talking about here, are like flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. In other words, it will overwhelm you. It will consume you. It will seem as powerful to you as the power of God. And so in verse 7, many waters cannot quench love, neither can floods drown it. If a man offered for love all the wealth of his house, he would be utterly despised. That's why you should not start that fire until you're ready for it. Otherwise, you'll get burned. Yes, it's worth waiting for. So wait. 14th, and finally, love is public. All through the Song of Solomon, there are these others. Did you notice that? They come up in verse, they came up here and there. Come up in verse 8 here in this passage. They're this chorus that's speaking up, these friends. And they're encouraging the man and the woman to love. They are for this relationship. At the end of the last half of chapter 8, with a couple now safely in love and married, they mention another young girl coming along, and they have a little sister in verse 8. Now that's this community, the people around, family, friends, today we'd include the church, want to care for her. What shall we do? If she is a wall, they say, that is, she is virtuous, she is wise, she's not easily taken advantage of, she's committed to purity before marriage, she hasn't stirred up a craving for romance, and so isn't vulnerable to just anyone, then we will help her. We will build on her battlements of silver, kind of adorn her, but also support her. If she's a door, that is, she's easy to take advantage of. Now, it may not mean that she's immoral, only that she's vulnerable. She's vulnerable to seduction. She's easily taken in by the smooth talk of some cute guy. She's needy. She's naive. Well, then what? Well, it's her life, and you've got to let her make her own decisions. That's good old American individualism, isn't it? My love life is my business alone. No, it's not. It's public. And so we, the community around her, the church, will, at the end of verse 9, enclose her with boards of cedar. That is, we, as a community, will supply what she lacks in wisdom to preserve her purity. Now, of course, for that to work, she or he has to cooperate, has to be committed to this, committed to listen. Right? She's going to be accountable. She's got to have that in her mind, that she's going to be accountable. Mostly, it could be with a guy, too. They're going to be accountable. Not going to run away if the others tell her what she doesn't want to hear. If there's no commitment, then there's no we. Nothing holding us together. And we can't protect someone from themselves when the temptations come hot and heavy. When Mary and I were dating, the elders of her church in Singapore sent a professor they knew there at the seminary to talk to her, make sure she was okay. They eventually asked her to come back to Singapore, leaving me in California, and she obeyed. She was accountable. She knew they weren't trying to deprive her of something good. And about a year later, those same elders, if you were here for Sunday school, you would have seen them. They performed our wedding. Love is public. Of course, the worldly person cannot understand this. I mean, what I've just said, the last point, is the most objectionable thing that you could possibly suggest to them. That there would be something you would allow to get in the way of love, something more important. Because for them, nothing is higher, nothing is greater than what they call love. It is as close to heaven as they will get. And that's the truth. It is as close to heaven as they will get. They know that, and that's the reality for them. And so it justifies anything. Any other relationship can be destroyed, even a previous marriage. Any commitment broken, any action justified, if it's done in the name of love. Love conquers all, says the world. Not at all meaning the self-giving love of the cross, but the passionately self-involved love of Eros. Some have said that today, Christianity's greatest rival is not Islam, not even materialism, but eroticism. Now meaning the love of sexual pleasure. But I think an even more powerful rival. Not just sex itself, but the whole apparatus of apparent love that it often comes in. Eros, by itself, exalted as a god. For that, nothing can be denied. It has to be honored unconditionally and obeyed without reservation. That's what the world thinks. And the worst crime today is telling someone that their love is forbidden. Even the Lord himself, some churches very clumsily imply, exists to maintain this God, Eros. That's why you so rarely hear these days Jesus is called to discipleship. In Luke chapter 18, verse 29, you must be willing to leave not simply brothers. That may be hard. That may be easy for many of us. Right, Maylin? Easy to leave brothers. Or parents. Or property. Okay, I'll divest myself of property. But can you believe it? Also, he says, wife, Eros, for the sake of the kingdom of God. Today we think the kingdom of God, sometimes churches imply this, is all about helping our relationship with our wife or husband. Eros over all. And yet the tragic irony is that as great as Eros, love, is, it drives us to promise what Eros itself cannot deliver. Romantic love, as we saw, with what Lewis said, it makes us want to give something that itself is not capable of making us give. It drives us to give our lives, to commit ourselves till death do us part. But it can't enable us to keep those vows. That's why despite all the failed marriages in our day, which people you think would be assuming, why bother, let's forget about it, marriage and all that, people still want to get married. That's Eros. Keep telling them, get married. But they lack what it takes to keep those marriages together. They're in love, and theirs will last. And they believe that with all their heart. But that kind of love lacks the power to enable us to make good on the promises that it compels us to make. You know, it's famously fickle. We've probably all known people who will loudly proclaim they are in love and they will be in love until the stars grow cold. And next year it's someone else. It's not that romantic love is bad. It's simply not enough. It needs to be a jewel in a setting of untarnishable gold that holds it solidly in place. The greater love of God's steadfast love. You know, the one we saw, of all places, in Lamentations, in the ashes and in the rubble of an obliterated Jerusalem. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. Now, for us, it is in the cross that we find a covenant love that is sturdy enough to hold all our fleeting loves in place. Romantic love is a great thing, but it's not the greatest of things. Without the greater thing of God's covenant love, Eros becomes a god, a cruel god, and then a demon. And that's the tragic irony, you know, of those who stir up this fire of love and end up pursuing it for its own sake. You know, in the end, so often such people, they don't get any kind of love. They just get burned. Instead, stir up and pursue the greater love of and love for the Lord. The greatest thing is not found at the marriage altar, but still at the cross.